Well, Ryan, we're back for another podcast to talk about thorns and thistles in the workplace. And you look surprised, like this was unexpected.
Yes.
Okay, well, what I would like to do, I think, is to talk about maybe one of the most universal challenges that everybody who has a job faces regularly. And that is doing your work as unto the Lord and doing your work and thinking in terms of how we serve the Lord in the intensity or in the quality or in the expression of actually working while we are at work. Maybe that's the best way of saying it, working while we are at work. That's not to excuse or remove the dynamics of taking breaks and having interactions, and sometimes the work has a level of intensity in which it's pretty rigorous, and other times when that level of work may not be as intense. So recognizing season cycles in the workflow, expressions of work and how things are done. But, well, let's just, I interview a lot of people for positions. I have for a long time. I don't know how many hundreds of people I've interviewed over the years about different positions, and it's becoming more and more common in certain generations and certain segments of our culture for the person I'm interviewing to immediately want to talk about on the front end before we've done anything else. Talk to me about work-life balance. With the thought of I'm only going to be available in this window of time for work. And even in that window of time, the amount of contribution you're going to get from me is limited. So I want to make sure that whatever that expectation is, that I am balanced in their understanding of what that balance looks like. More and more of a difficulty. And make it even more pressing. The first groups of Williams Work students that we brought on here really were outstanding. I was talking with our farm manager, Brad Flippo, about this yesterday. But we're running into some challenges in later cohorts, not across the board, but within those cohorts, certain students that want to be involved in the work program, they don't want to do the work. So they take the benefits that are afforded to them and only do the minimal amount they think they can get by with. And that's not a new thing. I mean, that probably is rooted in the fall in the garden. But it seems of late to become really accentuated that I am not going to commit to work, or I'm not going to commit to work as much as you want me to commit to work, or I'm going to take the job and then I'm going to look for ways to work around not working. So I don't know if you've had any interactions or observations in your experiences about this dynamic. I would think even in classroom, the work that students are expected to do and then the amount of work that they actually do, probably the expectation and the delivery are not always a match.
Sure. Every semester when I teach a class, I tell my students that this thing that I'm giving you at the beginning of the semester is the syllabus is a contract. And I say that it's got a job description. This is what we're going to do in this course. This is what you, the student, are going to do in this course. This is the intended outcome of this course. And in order to successfully complete the job, if you will, you're going to need to do this job here, this work here, this task here. And by that I mean the particular assignments, because right. I do think academics is a kind of work.
I do too.
Being a student is a kind of work itself. And then I'm going to pay you, if you will, based on how you achieve the outcomes that are expressed here in the contract. And that payment is in grades, not in money. And so some students take that very seriously, and they go above and beyond, working to to accomplish every task that's assigned in the class, and then others, if I can just get to that sacred D for diploma, that would be okay with me. And so yeah, I mean that's true in the classroom as well as in the workplace.
How do we frame? There are 2 or 3 levels that I see in it. One is just doing the minimum you need to do to get by. 2, doing wrongly to get by.
Yeah.
3, doing nothing and hoping you get by.
Right.
So doing the minimum, doing wrongly,
Yeah.
and then not doing anything at all.
Right.
Because, and help me out here, I tend to look at those attitudes as expressions of thorns and thistles.
Sure.
Whether I'm in the classroom or whether I'm on the field of competition or on the court, or whether I'm actually in a career vocation that pays me money, doing the minimum, doing wrongly, doing nothing.
Yeah, in this case, the thorns and thistles, it's not the curse on the ground, but it's the fall of humanity itself. It's the inward inclination and orientation towards sin that every human person, save for one, was born with. And of course, I think we talked in a previous conversation about doing all things as work unto the Lord. But if you have a different outcome in mind, maybe working so that you can produce income, maybe your chief end is to work so you can, you work for the weekend, if you know what I mean.
I do.
To have leisure on the other side of your work, then you're going to take some of these shortcuts here and there, and in a classroom setting, I mean, everything you just described, working to get by, working wrongly, and what was the last category?
Not working
at all. That can describe any number of student experiences I've had over the years. I mean, we have to have some come to Jesus conversations with students sometimes, for things that are working pretty minimally, and and then working wrongly. Of course, the big conversation in the academic world for the last 2 years or so has been surrounding AI.
Yeah, artificial intelligence.
And it has some tremendous potential applications for some fields. We've talked about its potential use in ag technology, or its potential use in graphic design, or there's a number of things that we can kind of put it in that category. But it also has the scary potential of just a student sitting down and saying, "Hey, write an assignment for me," and so it's become sort of this thing that teachers around here in particular have had to kind of learn how to deal with in new ways. And one professor who had sent me about 6 ChatGPT generated student papers at the end of the semester for me to deal with as a dean, I volunteered to go and pay for the blue books myself for him to use in his class. I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. And again, if you're using a tool like that just to get by, or to use it wrongly to not do the work, then that's a more serious or egregious thing.
So let's tackle those 3 things individually.
Yeah.
So let's talk about working minimally.
Yeah.
Why is that thorns and thistles work?
Well, it's thorns and thistles in the sense that it's working in a fallen world as a fallen human being, not unto the Lord. Remember, Colossians 3 uses the language of working wholeheartedly for the Lord. You can't do the minimal amount of work to get by and work wholeheartedly for the Lord. I think that's a product of being a fallen
I
creature.
don't know any hiring manager or boss that hires someone that says, okay, we're hiring you for the minimalist effort you can possibly get. We want the least amount.
Now, I know a lot of managers and bosses will do it for the minimal amount of pay we can give you, so there's that.
There is that.
So it's, on the boss's side of the table, we want to, get the maximum amount of work for you, the least amount of compensation. So that's another conversation.
That's right.
James 5. So I just don't think you can work wholeheartedly unto the Lord and simultaneously, work in such a minimalistic way.
But, Brother Ryan, it messes up my work-life balance. I mean, this is the amount I'm willing to commit to this job because of my work-life balance or other obligations or other things in my life. Doing much more, I feel like work is becoming an overseer of my life, a taskmaster of my life. So why is my minimum? I mean, I'm showing up, I'm giving a little bit, I'm doing something.
Well, I do think a work-life balance is important, and I mean, I think that's the Bible talks about that. I mean, that's tied into the very notion of a Sabbath. We have to have work-life. I mean, and before God gave the 10 Commandments to Moses, people worked 7-day work weeks, and literally, in ancient Near Eastern cultures, not necessarily in the culture of God's people, but they worked 7-day work weeks, and they worked themselves to death. Now, again, that was misunderstood by the Pharisees and the teachers of the law in very impractical ways in the Gospels. As you see, they didn't like Jesus healing on the Sabbath and that sort of thing, and Jesus' response was that Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So I think the very notion that Sabbath was made for man tells me that in God's mind there is something like a work-life balance.
Yes. But
it has to be a balance. I mean, I think that's the way that God has ordained it. Is there a way of getting that out of balance? Well, absolutely. Where you and by the way, work life is a strange kind of phrase, because what we really mean is we mean a number of different things.
It sounds like you're fragmenting your life.
I mean you're
segmenting this over here, away from here, away from that.
That's the basic premise of the popular TV show Severance. Are you familiar with that show?
I'm not. No.
So it's the idea of the show is that that these workers have this. When they go into work, they have no memory of their life outside of work. When they go into this building and they go up to the floor where they're working, they have no memory of their life outside of work. And when they leave the building, when they leave the floor where they work, they have no memory of their work. And there's an intentional design behind all of that. And the premise of the show is really basically, in some ways, an argument for why we need pain and why we need both life and work, and how those two things relate to one another. But I mean, I get and I appreciate and I understand the argument that there are things that I do here with my family that I don't necessarily do at work,
sure,
and vice versa. Or there's a time for rest and there's a time for work over here. So I would want to maintain that boundary without giving into idleness or laziness.
So the first category of a minimalist approach is it's hard to square that with a faithful, wholehearted as unto the Lord.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
Then the second, working wrongly.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
To square that, it's impossible.
But what if I can do something It may be wrong, but it gets me to the end result.
Well, it depends on what you mean by working wrongly. I'm not entirely sure if any of that qualifies as work.
Yeah, the artificial intelligence thing in the classroom, for example.
Well, it gives you the outcome of handing in an assignment. You're not done any work, though.
Well, but I fulfilled the course requirement of write a paper on
No, you
XYZ.
haven't. You've not written a paper. I mean, that's where we would lawyer you. I mean, you've handed in a paper. It's not a human written paper, and of course, the old school we used to open books and copy words out of them. That would have been the way that you cheated in a different time, or bought a term paper online.
Wow.
And there were people who had whole businesses dedicated to writing term papers, for them, and I'm sure their business has floundered since AI, has taken over. But I mean that's not really, it's not God honoring work. And I think we have a whole other conversation in store for other things that you talk about illegal activities that are not God honoring work, that kind of thing.
And the most obvious one is not working at all.
Right.
But expecting a reward for that lack of effort.
Sure. Going back to idleness.
Yeah. So it's interesting when you think historically, and we'll talk more about this in another podcast, but there are periods in which the pendulum seems to swing way over here for the thorns and thistles in this area, and then depending upon what's going on and which generation, the pendulum may swing back over here, and thorns and thistles look like this.
Right.
But I think there's a sense in which all of us wrestle with these things regularly. I mean, It's just the fact of being a sinner, need of redemption, living in a fallen world. We all struggle with I show up for work today, I'm doing the little as I get by with, or I'm showing up for work today, I'm going to get the job done, maybe not the right way of getting the job done, or I'm showing up for work today and I'm just not going to do anything today.
Sure. Paul, I can leave this with Paul, because Paul has some pretty sound advice on workplace behavior from 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. He says, "We command you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, to keep away from every brother or sister who is idle and who does not live according to the tradition received from us." He goes on, and this is kind of the way that Paul does leadership. It's not just top down, let me tell you what to do. He's modeling this kind of leadership. He says, "For you yourselves know how you should imitate us. We were not idle among you. We did not eat anyone's food free of charge. Instead, we labored and toiled, working day and night, so that we would not be a burden to any of you. It is not that we don't have the right to support, but we did it to make ourselves an example to you so that you would imitate us. In fact, when we were with you, this is what we commanded you. If anyone isn't willing to work, he should not eat. For we hear that there are some among you who are idle. They are not busy, but busy bodies." And I love that play on words there. Definitely in the way the English communicates that. Anyway, if you're not busy, you're a busy body. If you're not doing work, you're causing trouble at work. That sort of thing. And we command and exhort such people by the Lord Jesus Christ to work quietly and to provide for themselves. But as for you, brothers and sisters, don't grow weary in doing good.
Well, I think it's a good word, and I think it's a poignant reminder. Number one, thorns and thistles are in the workplace. Number two, none of us are immune from these temptations. And number three, maybe one of the best ways of addressing this is if you're in a position of leadership at work, be an example.
Right.
If you're not in a position of leadership at work, you can still be an example.
Right.
Show up, do what's expected of you, do it the right way, and put in a good day.
Sure.
As unto the Lord.
Right.